All right, welcome again. Diabetes Cooking Club for February. My name is Tina Guajardo, registered dietitian, and I will be your facilitator today for today's February Diabetes Cooking Club. We've got two greats with us today. We've got Isabel Hinton and we've got Kim House. Isabel, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our very fun Diabetes Cooking Club this lovely cold-ish day in February. I'm Isabel Hinton, and I am a health educator with Brownson's Community Health Department, and I'm excited to be cooking with you all.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kim House. I am the registered dietitian here in Bronson, South Haven. I'm also a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. So I bring you nutrition and diabetes education. So excited for this morning, and birds chirping, a little bit of rain. Make some warm things and sweet treats.
Yep, and I'm seeing the leftover leaves too in my yard. All right, well, thank you guys again for being here with us. This is our February Diabetes Cooking Club. Our topic of conversation today is desserts for your sweetheart. Today is February 26th. It is 9 o'clock, and we are going to go ahead and get started after a little bit of housekeeping. We are currently on Zoom and doing a virtual program here, so we do have closed captioning enabled. If you do need to see the text as we are speaking, go to the bottom of your screen. You're going to see a little CC button. If you click on that, you can see the closed captioning up on your screen. It may not always be 100% accurate, and so if you ever need any clarification on what has been said, please just type that into the chat and we would be happy to clarify for you. Additionally, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see your additional controls. You're going to see your little microphone at the bottom of the screen. We do ask that you remain muted for the entirety of today's session, just to decrease any background noise or interruptions. If you would like to be on camera, you also have those controls there at the bottom too. We love to see your smiling faces, so good morning to those faces that we do see this morning. We will have opportunities for you to unmute yourself, however, during today's class. We do love to have participation from you all, so we'll ask you some questions and you can utilize the chat or you can unmute during that time to answer. Today's session is being recorded, and so it will be placed up on our Bronson YouTube page in about 1 to 2 weeks if you need to rewatch today's program. Just as a general disclosure, this is a diabetes cooking club. However, the information that you do here today is intended as general health information, should never be used as a substitute for your own personal medical care, but instead can be used as a tool for something for you to talk about with your provider to see if that is an appropriate action for you yourself. So from here, we're going to pass it on to Kim to get us kick-started in today's Diabetes Cooking Club.
All right, thank you, Tina. So good morning again. And so we have a agenda today over February Heart Month, eating well with your heart and diabetes, how you balance that out. We have some beautiful recipes, and we're going to look and compare some of those nutrition profiles of the recipes compared to something you might find in the store, talk about our swaps and modifications we can make, as well as some final tips on choosing some of our recipes that are on the sweet side. So I have a chat question as I'm speaking here about February is Heart Month. It's American Heart Month. So what do you do in February to take care of your heart? So go ahead and type that in the chat. What do you do in February to take care of your heart? February is American Heart Month. This is a special month that is close attention to understanding, preventing, and treating heart disease. And what we do know, and what the American Heart Association notices, is that type 2 diabetes is one of the major controllable risk factors to heart disease. And we know that people with diabetes are twice as likely to have heart disease. So we want to just kind of take this opportunity for you guys and focus on our heart, and as well as February being that month with a sweet treat. So what do we have there, Tina? What are they saying?
Yeah, so we've got somebody saying that they're working on their exercise and eating their whole grain. I personally shared working on a little bit of stress reduction because that impacts my heart health as well. We've got somebody sharing that they are setting up appointments with their specialists. So getting their pulmonology checks, their cardiology checks, and their endocrinology checks up to date. We've got somebody that's walking more and eating less red meat. And then somebody is saying that they are just working on focusing just being consistently active. He states that he rode his bike 100 miles last Saturday on his indoor trainer. Ooh.
Excellent. Excellent. So some of us are exercising, focusing on our diet. Others are getting those checks with their, specialists. Our blood cholesterol maybe pointed out annually, right? So today we're going to focus more on that nutrition, but I love all those ideas and where we've put our focus on for our heart. Very individualized. So eating well for our diabetes is so important to manage our blood sugars. If you've been with me before, we talk a lot about, just having that balance. We have grains, we've got proteins, we've got green vegetables, all of those things, and that focus on balance and lots of color on our plate helps to not only maintain our weight, but also help our blood sugars. And last but not least, prevent or at least delay some of those issues we might have with our diabetes, including heart disease. So this is a nice, well-rounded topic because it's not only beneficial for our heart and our diabetes and perhaps our weight as well. So we have some tips today, some discussion about that. So how do you balance what we're going to eat when you have both heart disease and diabetes? So some of us ail from, we've had a stroke, we have high cholesterol, we've had a heart attack, we have coronary artery disease, which is one of the most common things. So how do we balance this out? Some general guidelines I have for you is that we should focus on those very nutrient dense. So most of the time, eat foods that are very, very colorful, because that color is typically very high in vitamins. So if it's come from a tree and it's fresh, focus on those types of foods. They've been untouched, essentially, maybe something from the ground. We're going to focus on our chickpeas today, our raspberries, but most of the time eat nutrient-dense foods, things that have not been, handled and touched and not packaged. So, our whole grains, our fruits and vegetables, our heart-healthy oils, and our heart-healthy proteins. What I want to point out here that I highlighted in red, though, is that we have to be very cautious about being overly restrictive. When we have diabetes, we tend to just cut cold turkey and leave everything out, and we might find ourselves with our hands in boxes or baked goods that because we're really restricting too much. So today I'm going to bring to you, and with my team here, 2 heart-healthy, blood sugar-friendly sweet recipes. And so avoid being overly restrictive. Allow yourself some things once in a while, eating mostly nutrient-dense foods most of the time. Balance your meal, look at the colors, look at the textures. Even your snacks can be that way. And we've talked through our classes before about that balance, and the portion size is so important for our heart and for our diabetes. So really looking at those few general guidelines. So before we dive into this low sugar raspberry oatmeal crumble bar, I have another chat question. In the chat, put in there, what is your favorite baked good? And maybe it's a healthy baked good or not, but what is your favorite baked good? What do we see there?
Yeah, we've got a few people answering. So first two answers were brownies, mine included.
You will be my best friend then.
The fudgier, the better. All right, we also have some cupcakes. We have some cookies. We've got milk chocolate brownies, very specific. Somebody says, uh-oh, a plain sour cream donut from D&W, very specific. All right, fruit pie, especially rhubarb fruit pie. Somebody's mother-in-law's pie. Need to be careful with that. Brownies. Ooh, I think brownies got the most vote, but it's otherwise quite varied. We've got donuts, we've got cookies, we've got cakes, we got pies. Nobody's at a bar. We'll add this to the mix.
We are adding it.
Very good. All right, thank you all so much for sharing. We're going to now turn it over to Isabel to talk through these low sugar raspberry oatmeal crumble bars.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be baking with you guys today because that is something that I love to do. So we're going to be doing this low sugar raspberry oatmeal crumble bar. So the great and cool thing about this bar is not only is it delicious, but it's low sugar. It's beautiful. I mean, when you see the end result, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's reminiscent of a almost like an apple crisp, but with raspberries. So if you love, that crumble like on an apple crisp or whatever, you are going to love these bars. And one thing I really want to point out is if you're following along on the screen, there is a lot of raspberries in this bar. So there is 2.5 cups. You could even go with 3 cups of raspberries if you wanted to. So there's quite a bit of those delicious, heart healthy raspberries in there that are loaded with fiber and nutrients. So this is going to be a very good bar, and I'm sure it's going to make it on your rotation of some of your favorite baked goods. So Tina, if you want to spotlight me, and then we can talk through the ingredients while we're adding them to our dish. All right, awesome. So, as you can see, it kind of looks like I have a lot of ingredients on my countertop. However, the cool thing about this bar is it comes together fairly quickly. It's kind of a dump and go. We're gonna make the filling first, and then we're gonna make the topping, and then you're good to put it into a little 8x8 square pan. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add our rinse to make sure they're washed really well because, berries are absolutely delicious, but just like all of the fruits and vegetables, we want to make sure that we're washing them pretty well to ensure we're getting off, some of those extra, maybe pesticides that are on it or dirt or bugs. So making sure we're giving those raspberries a good rinse. So I rinsed those for quite a while this morning. So I've got raspberries. You can see how much of the pan is already taken up by raspberries. All right. And then we're going to start making our base, which is going to be a little bit of sugar and some lemon juice and some water. So with our raspberries, we're going to be adding only 2 tablespoons of sugar to this little filling here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to scoop my 2 tablespoons here, just kind of pour it right there onto my raspberries. And then we're going to add some lemon juice, which this recipe calls for a teaspoon of lemon juice. If you wanted to, you could cut a lemon in half and you could squeeze out that juice. But in the sake of time and the fact that I don't love doing that, because then you have to do the whole seeds and everything, I just got the easy bottle lemon juice. And that works totally fine in this recipe. So I'm going to add a teaspoon of lemon juice to my pan here. And then we're going to add only 1 tablespoon of the water. We're going to use the water a little bit later in the recipe, but for now, we're only going to add about a tablespoon of water to our raspberry mixture. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to put this on my stove top. And what we're trying to do is basically reduce these raspberries almost into like a chunky kind of sauce. So it's going to take a minute for them to kind of heat up. But when they start to heat up, I'll be able to mix them and stir them. And then therefore it'll start to make our little sauce. So I'm going to throw those right on the stove top. Okay, so before I move on to the filling, I just want to know from you all in the audience, what is your favorite fruit? So we know that February is American Heart Month, and we know that making sure we're eating a beautiful color of fruits and vegetables, a rainbow of fruits and vegetables, is really important for healthy bodies, healthy hearts. So I would just like to know from you all what your favorite fruit is. Because the cool thing with these bars is they're super you can change them. So if you love strawberries, you can make these bars with the strawberries instead of raspberries. If you love blueberries, you can make them with blueberries instead. So it's a recipe that you can change to suit your own tastes. What do we got so far?
Well, you are getting a lot of berry lovers in the group. We've got strawberries, we've got blueberries, and I think blueberries might be the number one answer so far. We also have blueberries and pineapple and currants, which I've never had before, to be honest with you. And just like you said, I think we could use blueberries or strawberries in this recipe, or even a combination. Like if we did a strawberry blueberry or a strawberry raspberry combination for these bars, that would be delicious too.
Definitely. And for all of my berry lovers out there, if you are from Michigan, you are in the perfect place because in the summertime, we are just full of berries and it's great. So if you love this recipe right now in the wintertime, try it in the summertime when the raspberries and the strawberries and the blueberries are all in season and it's just gonna blow your mind. So, all right, thank you everybody for sharing. So I've got my raspberries starting to heat up, starting to kind of break down a little bit in the pan. So while we continue to let that break down and heat up, we are going to make a slurry. So a slurry is basically cornstarch and water. So I got my bowl here and I'm going to be adding 2.5 tablespoons of cornstarch to my bowl. And then this is going to kind of help thicken up our sauce a little bit once it's broken down. So I'm going to add 1 tablespoon. Then I'm going to add a 2nd tablespoon right to my bowl. And then about 1/2 of a tablespoon to it as well. Okay. And then we're going to be adding 2.5 tablespoons of water because we already added 1 tablespoon of water to our sauce mixture. So we're only going to be adding 2.5 tablespoons to this this little slurry here. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's about 1/2. So I'm just going to kind of give this a nice little mix. Give it a nice, it's going to start kind of looking sort of like a paste. I'm going to mix it, mix it, mix it, mix it. Get it all nice and dissolved in there. And then we are going to add this to our raspberry mixture in just a second. Mix it. All right. Now I set that aside for just a second while I continue to let these heat up. So while I'm letting this heat up, Tina, do you have any questions about these raspberry bars for our participants here? Or Kim, do you have any questions about any other desserts that our participants enjoy?
Well, this might be a perfect time. We've got a question in the chat for you, Isabel, and they want to know, can you use frozen berries for this recipe?
You definitely can. Yes, you definitely can. So that is a perfect way to make this recipe as well, especially like we are in Michigan when a lot of our fruits and vegetables is out of season. So yes, frozen works just as fine. The only thing with the frozen is I would maybe reduce the water by just a teeny tiny bit because you're going to get some of that water from the frozenness of the of the raspberries. Great question. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to show this to you really quick so you guys can kind of see what I mean by the raspberries starting to kind of break down. Now, if nobody has ever cooked with raspberries before, it smells so delicious. Has anybody ever cooked raspberries on the stove before? Because it just honestly makes my house smell so delicious. I don't know if that's surprising to anybody.
I'll let people answer that in the chat. The only thing I have experience in cooking raspberries that is absolutely beautiful is in one of our other diabetes cooking clubs, we did like a low sugar raspberry, like green tea. and you know, boil down those raspberries to get that flavor for adding to your tea as well, that natural sweetness. Yes. And so some people have experience when they're making some fruit jam, really cooking down those raspberries, and they are agreeing it is fragrant.
Oh, it smells so delicious. Oh my goodness. So good. All right. So my raspberries are really starting to break down a little bit now. So we're going to let them simmer for just a little bit more. And I'm going to add my cornstarch and water, a little slurry to this mixture. And then we're going to let that simmer for a little while to kind of let it thicken. So while we're letting that kind of thicken, I'm going to kind of be jumping back and forth between stirring my simmering pot here and then starting to make the topping. So you can see the little kind of paste that we made with our cornstarch and our water. I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to dump that right into my raspberry sauce here. Give it another good little mixture, and then I'm going to let this simmer when we move on to our topping and base of this bar. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is you're going to want to get an 8x8 square pan. I mean, it doesn't have to be square. You can do a circle pan, but just for this specific recipe, for how long it should be baking for and everything, we're using a square 8x8 pan. So I'm going to spray that with some non-stick spray. And then we're going to set it aside, and we're going to start making our mixture, which is so delicious because it uses some really tasty ingredients. So lower that so it doesn't get too overheated. Okay, so we are going to mix together some oats, some almond flour, a little bit of sugar, some spices, some margarine, and some vanilla and almond extracts. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to blend up some quick oats. So I do want to mention one of the things that we can do that helps with heart health is eat more whole grains. And oats are a whole grain. So we used quick oats in this recipe. I've already blended up my oats. So I took a cup of the 1 3/4 cups of oats and blended it all the way into this fine kind of like flour that you see here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the rest of our oats. So I'll lower that, starting to get too boiling. All right. So now we've already had the cup of oats right here. So now we're going to add about 3/4 cups oats to the rest of this oat. So these ones you don't have to blend up. It's going to give that nice kind of texture, contradicting texture when we make our oat crumble. All right, then we are going to also add a 1/4 cup of almond flour to our topping here. Now, I don't know if Tina or Kim, if you want to speak a little bit about almond flour and how it's a little bit different than the all-purpose flour. I do want to point out that almond flour, since it uses almonds, it does have protein in it, which is really great as well. So Kim and or Tina, if you guys want to talk a little bit about the benefits of almond flour.
I can start, Kim, and you can add to that. So I used almond flour in one of our other diabetes cooking club classes too when we did those protein bars. And so almond flour definitely has a different color to it. You're definitely going to notice that as well. And it's a lower carbohydrate type of flour, right? So all-purpose flour or a whole wheat flour is going to be a higher carbohydrate content type of flour. I don't know, what would you say from a consistency standpoint, Isabel, as you're kind of touching that?
Do you feel like it's not as fine to me as like an all-purpose flour is? But it's still, I mean, so this is a super fine almond flour, but I do feel like it's a little bit, the best explanation is it feels a little tougher almost in this recipe. So just there's a little bit more body to it, I guess is the best way I can explain it.
Yep. So lower carbohydrate essentially. So, you know, especially when we're talking about like a sweet dessert, For blood sugar control, an almond flour instead of an all-purpose flour can be a good swap to further reduce those carbohydrates for blood sugar control.
Awesome. Thank you for mentioning that. So I've added now a 1/4 cup of that almond flour to my oats. And then I also just added a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder to it. We have just a couple of more dry ingredients to add to this, and then we're going to give it a good mix. So now we're going to add a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. So as you can see, this recipe does not use that much added sugar in it. I mean, if you're going to be, making a brownie or something like that, that's going to have upwards of, 1 3/4 cups to 2 cups of, sugar in that. Where this has the 2 tablespoons of sugar in our raspberry filling, and then the 1/4 cup of brown sugar in our topping. So, and that's spread across 16 servings. So that's pretty good. So we've got our oats, we've got our almond flour, we've got our baking powder, we've got our brown sugar so far in our bowl. The last 2 things we're going to add is a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. So this is where those spices are going to, kind of add that warmth and that layer of flavor to our dish here. So a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and then a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Throw that right in there as well. You can use allspice, you could use ginger, you could use more cinnamon and less nutmeg. It's totally up to you and what you enjoy the best. So I'm now going to give this a good stir to kind of get all of my ingredients nice and combined. And then what we're going to do is we are going to add some butter and we're going to add some extracts to it. And then that's going to be the end of our toppings here. So once I'm done kind of mixing this and combining this, I'm going to show you how nice this kind of looks all combined and mixed together when you got that sugar and the almond flour and the oats all nice and combined. Okay. Give you a quick glance at that. You can kind of see the texture. It's almost like a thick sand. All right. Now I'm going to set that aside for just a second. Give my raspberry filling here another stir. It's starting to thicken up really nice. I'll show it to you really quick so you can see how thick that's kind of getting. All right. I'm going to let it simmer for just another minute or 2, and then I'm going to take that off the heat. All right. So now the next part and the last part of this is we are going to mix together our margarine and our extracts. So in my bowl here, I am going to melt a 1/3 cup of margarine. So correct me if I'm wrong, Kim and or Tina, but margarine is also a good choice for this recipe because margarine is a little bit heart healthier for us than butter. Do I have that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And we looked at this recipe and potentially using an oil instead of a margarine, but from a texture component, we needed something a little bit more firm to create that crumble. So today we are using a margarine choice, and I realize that maybe not everybody uses margarine. It typically is made more with a vegetable oil, which would be a heart-healthy option. But you could always use a plant-based butter too, which is quite similar in nutrient content. So thanks for asking, Isabel.
Yeah. All right. So I didn't want to melt my margarine completely, again, because of that whole texture point of it. So I just softened it quite a bit so that when I mix it together with my oats and my flour, it's going to get that lovely crumble texture that you get when you're making apple crisp or something similar. So to our butter, we are going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Go ahead, dump that right in there. And then we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. Throw that right in there as well. Ooh, that's a little bit too much. Okay. So now I dumped a little bit too much of that almond mixture. All right. Again, if you don't like almond extract, you don't have to use the almond extract. So I'm going to give this a nice kind of little mix, get it all kind of combined together. It's going to look not that great right now, but when we dump it into our oats here, it's going to be great. I love the smell of almond extract. It smells so good. I don't know. It reminds me of something when I was a child, but I don't know what, but it smells really good. All right. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to add our butter to our mixture here. And then I'm actually going to use my fingers to kind of combine all of this together. So if you've ever made a crumble before, you kind of got to get in there. It gets a little messy, but then you have this lovely crumble that it's going to make. So when we're done making this crumble, I'm going to take about half-ish of it and I'm going to put it at the bottom of my pan. So the cool thing with these bars is that you're going to get this oat mixture on both the bottom and the top of our bars. So mix it all up. Does anybody here hate using their hands when they're mixing and baking? Anybody have like they don't love doing that? Or is everyone just like good with it?
I'm good
I
with
love
it.
doing it when it's raw meat.
You like using raw meat and doing it?
I don't like doing it when it's raw meat.
Okay, I was gonna say, oh man, that is opposite of me. Like, all right, good. Yes, I love with baked goods, not with meat, but with baked goods.
Somebody says that's what they make gloves for.
That's true. Yes, I definitely use gloves when it comes to touching meats. But it's almost like I don't know, you know how they have those like fidgets and stuff like that? I love the texture of mixing together like the butter and the oats. It's just a nice, kind of is like a sand. All right. So now you can see that my crumble is starting to make a really nice crumble. I'm going to take a second. I'm going to wash my hands so I can remove this raspberries from the saucepan. And while I'm doing that, do you have any questions, ideas, topics, Tina or Kim?
No questions have come through the chat at this point. Somebody did ask the question that I thought was worthy of just pointing out, like if somebody were living with peanut allergies, can they continue to use an almond flour? And typically I would say yes, as long as they don't have a tree nut allergy, which is different than a peanut allergy. However, I suppose somebody could be living with both allergies. Just make sure to always look at your labels when you're choosing something like an almond flour, just to make sure that it has not been processed in a facility with peanuts, because that could potentially cause some cross-contamination. And then I was just making this statement, Isabel, that like I think about extracts, like I think about herbs and spices, right? Extracts and baked good kind of adds that flavor without those extra sugars, which is what we're trying to accomplish in this recipe. Just like herbs and spices add flavor when we're cooking without added salt.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. And yes, that was a very great question about the allergies. I do want to mention, yes, that almond flour is made with ground up almonds. And so again, if there's a tree nut allergy, it's very important to look at those food labels. This specific one right here, it's just the ingredients are blanched almonds, and then it says it contains tree nuts. So, just looking at the food labels to make sure that you and your family are staying safe. All right, so I've got my crumble mix, beautiful crumble mix in my pan, or in my little bowl here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add about half of this to the bottom of my pan. And then I am going to press it down to kind of create like a crust. So pressing that down, I can add a teeny bit more here just to cover my whole bottom of my pan. All right, I'll show you kind of what that looks like. And you'll see that it creates this nice little crust on the bottom. You can see, just like that. Nice and formed to the bottom. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to spoon our raspberry filling over this pressed oat mixture. Then I'm going to pop this in the oven at 350 degrees, which my oven is already preheated for. And then I'm going to have Tina and Kim kind of shut off my video so I can reset for our next recipe. All right, that's going right on top. You can see how nice and thick that is. It smells absolutely phenomenal. Throw that right in. I'm definitely gonna have to soak this pan. So something to keep in mind. It's gonna create a bit of a sticky mess in your pan, but that's all right. That's all part of cooking. All right. So I've added that to the top. It is hot, so I'm not going to use my hands to spread it around. I'm just going to kind of shake my pan to cover up our whole bottom of the crust. Shake it up. You can see that layer so far. It's all covered that. And now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to top my oats on top of it. And then Kim and Tina, feel free to move on.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. This is exactly where smell-o-vision would come in handy because I bet you are just basking in all that raspberry fragrance right now. All right. Well, Isabel's going to pop that into the oven. So we're going to go ahead and pass it back to Kim. And she is going to kind of talk us a little bit more through that recipe and some of those nutrients and what to be looking for. So here we go. Are you seeing my screen, Kim?
I do. And why don't you move on to the nutrient, perhaps the next slide, because I'll go through some of those. So you guys, I made these last week, everyone, and just delicious, beautiful, bright. So that smell-o-vision would be great and even better in your own home. So let's look at the nutrients that is in this recipe. And raspberries, you know, that heart-healthy carbohydrate. We've got a little bit of sugar with the 2 types of sugar. We got lemon juice. I mean, these are all just minimal types of carbohydrates added by tablespoons. Cornstarch, you know, the quick oats, there's a cup and 3/4 or so, which is a good whole grain to help our blood sugar stable with that fiber. Our almond flour, another whole grain with some protein in it, and then just minimal extracts in there to bring out that flavor. The protein is going to be that almond flour. So if we used a all-purpose flour, we would not have the benefit of having grain, whole grains, fiber, and protein in that. And then the little bit of dietary fat that's in there is from our margarine or our plant butter that we might use. So I've got up here a comparison of our low sugar crumble bars on the left-hand side, if you can see on your screen. And I chose Ina Garten, her crumble bars. And so I'm comparing bar to bar. So for one of our crumble bars in that 8x8, 16 servings, it is 106 calories compared to the 437 that's in Ina Garten's, which is tremendously different. Our crumble bar is total fat of 5 grams, which is considered considerably lower compared to Ina Garten's at 19 grams. The saturated fat, that unhealthy and definitely not heart healthy saturated type fat, is only 1 gram in our low sugar crumble bar, where there's 11 grams in Ina Garten's. The sodium is in half in ours. You know, we use just very little amounts in the variety of products. The carbohydrates are very minimal. You know, for a bar, it's 12 grams. It's very minimal, much less than a usual dessert or sweet treat, where hers was 64 grams. And look at the comparison of the sugars, the actual type of carbohydrate. When we look at sugar, you know, that brown or that any added type is 5 grams in our crumble bars compared to 34. And then we have protein, you know, comparison. I was trying to itemize where she might have had a little bit more protein, but guys, you can get protein in a dessert. That's unheard of. So any protein is great, and fiber as well. So really heart healthy when you come to a crumble bar. And I like to point out that I didn't even think about varying the fruit. How can we change this recipe up? And when we asked you guys about what fruit your favorite thing would be is blueberries, strawberries. I didn't even think about putting that here. I love that idea. So it's year-round kind of dessert. So they're all antioxidant type fruits, vitamin C. So just so beneficial all around. So varying your fruits. You can vary the sugars. Some of us like to use sugar alternatives, a Splenda or perhaps a stevia. So I know some of us like those types of things. Some of us not so much. We can also vary the oats and the flour, right? As we spoke, depending on our allergies or our intolerances, if we like that texture difference. I personally loved it. I have a gluten intolerance, and so almond flour worked great. I liked that fine flour with some of those oats. It really made it feel like it was actually like a baked cookie bar. And then you can vary up the fat, like Tina was mentioning, you know, right? You want something more solid to kind of cut into that flour to make it so you can crumble, and you don't want so much of an oil. But we all can look at those, you know, nothing that is hydrogenated, of course. We want it heart healthy, so a plant butter can work too, just not an oil. So lots of modifications we can make for this.
And before you move on, Kim, we've got a question in the chat
Yeah.
asking if this recipe is considered a vegan recipe.
Ooh.
I know.
If you were to modify it with your plant butter,
Mhm.
I believe, yes, absolutely. It can fit that lifestyle as well.
Yep. Yep. Vegan, vegetarian. And then I was also thinking like we could have added
Gluten-free.
maybe some slivered almonds or something along those lines.
Sure.
Just add some extra crunch or some extra protein a little bit too.
Absolutely.
That'd be a nice
Absolutely.
addition.
Your
Mhm.
favorite topping of like a nut crumble, just kind of chop it up. Yeah, love it. Yes, good question.
All right. Well, thank you, Kim. We are going to now pass it back to Isabel to move on to our next recipe. So let's get Isabel back. So as Isabel is coming back online here she comes. She is going to be moving on with our next recipe, which is a chickpea cookie dough, which I am so excited about. Isabel, do you want the recipe up on the screen right now?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing that I want to say is thank you for being here and believing that desserts can actually be healthy. So I say that because I'm a baker at heart. I love baking cupcakes and cookies and brownies and all of that. The raspberry oatmeal bars, amazing, phenomenal. You're gonna love them. The chickpea cookie dough, I was not convinced. I was like, this is not, no, like this is not, there should not be garbanzo beans in cookie dough, which Tina and Kim are probably laughing because they love garbanzo beans and chickpeas. So I was a little bit nervous trying this recipe. However, I was brave and I tried this recipe and I was so surprised with actually how good this recipe is. So even though you're gonna watch me make it and you're gonna be like, what? I don't know about that. I'm telling you, it's absolutely delicious. So, the recipe that you have on here is kind of gonna be sort of like an almond joy. All right. So the recipe that we're going to be making is kind of an almond joy, chocolatey kind of type cookie dough. And I do want to point out that this is going to be a dip. I do not recommend baking it. It's not that great baked, but as a dip with like some fruit or some graham crackers, it's really quite delicious. So this is going to be an almond joy type recipe, though if you link to Chocolate Covered Katie, who has this original recipe. Her recipe is also absolutely delicious. Her recipe is kind of more like it's kind of got like a peanut butter chocolate chip type flavor, whereas this is kind of more of like an almond joy type flavor. So chickpeas, yes, they can actually turn this delicious dessert into something amazing. So chickpeas, very high in protein, very good source of plant-based protein. And again, like Kim had said, who ever thought about a dessert having protein? So I will talk through the rest of the ingredients as we go through them if you want to spotlight me. All right. Before I start, I just want to know here, has anybody ever tried something like this before? A chickpea cookie dough dip? Anybody? Or is that like too, I don't know about that.
It's next on my docket, so I'm going to try it.
All right. Okay, I see a lot of no's. I see one yes. Awesome. All right. So it's really good. You are going to be so surprised. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to rinse our chickpeas. So chickpeas are, you can find them in a can. They're either going to say chickpeas or they're going to say garbanzo beans. I wins with a no salt added garbanzo bean. So if you can find that, of course, that's going to be best to do the no salt added. But if you cannot, rinsing them, which is one of the steps you actually have to do in this recipe, is going to help kind of reduce that sodium content, again, helping with our heart. So, this garbanzo bean here was rinsed really, really well. So you drain out the liquid from the garbanzo bean cans, and then you run this and rinse it like through your hands to make sure you kind of get all that stuff off. So I rinsed it, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add my garbanzo beans to our dish right here. So throw them in, set that aside. Okay, so now the rest of the recipe is literally just dump recipes. So this recipe calls for an 1/8 teaspoon of salt, which I do not have my salt out. So Tina and Kim, if you have a chat question while I run and grab my salt, or want to talk a little bit more about chickpeas, please do while I go grab my salt.
Oh, she's leaving us to talk about chickpeas, our favorite topic. So, dietitians tend to love chickpeas. They're versatile. Not only can you use them in dessert, who knew? You can use them, obviously, to make a variety of different hummus recipes, right? For your vegetables. You can throw them on top of a salad. You can mix them in with some sauteed vegetables for like a plant-based stir fry. There's so many things you can do with a 59-cent can of garbanzo beans from your local discount store. How about that, Isabel?
All right, I love it. I knew I could count on you to talk about chickpeas. All right, so I've got my chickpeas in my food processor. Now you can make this recipe in a high quality blender. I've never done it in a high quality blender. I've made this 3 times so far since I found this recipe. And let me tell you really quick, my husband was so excited to have a dessert because he's been really trying to be healthy and not really have desserts. And so he's like, oh, can you make a dessert? And I said, yeah, sure. So I did this without him knowing. So I made this chickpea cookie dough, and then I had him try it. And he was like, wow, this is really good. And he goes, why are you watching me while I'm trying it? And I started laughing, and he started getting nervous. He said, why are you laughing? Why are you laughing? And I said, well, it's made with chickpeas. And he goes, I don't even know what chickpeas are. And I said, well, they're kind of bean. And he was like, what? No, why'd you tell me that? Blah, blah, blah. I don't want it anymore. Blah, blah, blah. Then I walk away, and he's back over at this chickpea cookie dough bowl, scooping another graham cracker into it, grabbing another scoop of the chickpea cookie dough. So if that tells you anything, it's very good. All right, so I've got my chickpeas in here. I'm now going to add just about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. So I only have my 1/4 teaspoon measuring cup here, so I'm going to do half of that. All right, throw that in there. Then I'm gonna add 1/8 of a teaspoon of baking soda. Now, what's really interesting is, like, since this isn't getting baked, why are you doing baking soda? It just adds kind of a flavor of that, cookie dough. I mean, you put baking soda in cookie dough, this kind of adds that little flavor of it. So adding about 1/8 of a teaspoon to that. Then we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of almond butter for this almond joy type recipe. Like I said, if you link to the original recipe, you can use any nut butter in there, but I used peanut butter when I made the original recipe, and that was really, really tasty. So whatever nut butter you have at home that you enjoy. Of course, Nut butter is a good source of protein, so another good thing for our hearts and our bodies. So I'm adding a quarter cup of that to my bowl. All right, and then a little bit of sugar. So I'm going to be adding about a half cup of sugar to this recipe. Now, in the original recipe, again, she uses about a third of a cup of sugar, which is actually plenty. This one is just a little bit, to make it a little bit more almond joy-ish. I'm doing half a cup here. However, you, of course, can use less sugar, especially if you are somebody who, doesn't like things very sweet. The half cup of sugar does make it quite sweeter, like a cookie dough, but still, even if you're making a regular cookie dough, the regular cookie dough is going to be using about a cup of sugar. So, all right. So I'm adding my half cup of brown sugar to my recipe here. Then I'm just going to add my extract and I'm going to give it a nice blend and my cocoa powder. So while I blend this up and I'm gonna add the ingredients and everything. And when I'm blending it, Tina and Kim, you can go ahead and shut my video off and my microphone off, and then I can get everything all set. Sound good?
Yes. Sounds good.
Perfect.
So,
All right. So do you have a question while I can, sorry, I interrupted.
No, I'm going to remove the spotlight so I can mute you. You're good to go. Kim, do you want to talk through some of your slides while we are
Absolutely.
working with Isabel?
Yeah, for sure. So let's take a peek at the ingredients here and the nutrients, specifically carbs, protein, and fat in this recipe. So we've identified the carbohydrate sources. There's chickpeas or white beans, garbanzo beans. In the recipe, it does mention you can add up to a quarter cup of milk of choice. It doesn't look like Isabel added that, but just as needed for consistency. Of course, your sugars or sweeteners could be a source of carbs and a little bit of that extract, unsweetened cocoa powder. Eventually, there will be chocolate chips, but the quick oats, the almond flour, whatever you might put in there to kind of thicken and hold this cookie dough recipe together. And the protein source is going to be also the beans, the chickpeas, as well as the slivered almonds. And then if you use almond flour, or any of the flax meal, that all can be a source of good protein. And then the dietary fat comes from that almond butter, and it comes from some of those slivered almonds. So there's good heart healthy plant-based fats in this recipe. There is also protein, which again, usually in your desserts, you're not going to find protein. It's just going to be a lot more sugars. So let's compare this recipe. Actually, I know Isabel's been talking about Almond Joys, but I compared this to the Nestle Toll House Tub cookie dough. And so 2 tablespoons. So think about the size of your thumb is a tablespoon. And then so 2 kind of, you get it, like 2 tablespoons. So comparing both of those recipes, there are 60 calories in 2 quick tablespoons of chickpea, but there's 120. So it doubles it immediately in 2 tablespoons of the Nestle Toll House Tub. Your total fat grams is 2.5 in the chickpea recipe, which is quite low in fat for a cookie dough, and it's 6 grams. So it doubles it again in the Nestle Toll House Tub. The saturated fat very low in our chickpea recipe. Really, there is no or minimal, saturated fats where it's over double in the Nestle Toll House. The sodium, even though we're using a little bit of eighth of a teaspoon of salt in our chickpea recipe, it is 3 times as more in the Toll House. Carbohydrates are doubled in the Toll House, so very minimal. Even though we do have a laundry list of carbohydrates, it's still very minimal in those 2 tablespoons that we provided here. The sugars are about cut in half. Just the minimal amount of sugar we use in this, the added sugars in that very, very minimal. Like Isabel was saying, there's still protein provided and there's dietary fiber. So those are all bonuses for 2 tablespoons.
And you can cut that down, that sugar, just a little bit more if you decided to go with a third cup of sugar instead of the half a cup like we analyzed it at.
Absolutely. So those modifications and swaps we have on that next slide, again, just yeah, changing up, you know, the chickpeas, the beans, perhaps if chickpeas aren't your favorite, maybe perhaps there's a different bean, but definitely rinsing your canned items, lowering that salt, even eliminating that table salt use, varying the milk, even though there's a little bit of milk used. If you're lactose intolerant, you can use a plant-based milk. You can vary those sugars or even reduce the amount of sugar, right? And then you can vary the grain. You can make that gluten-free, you know, using an almond flour or another grain to thicken that in the end. So lots of different ways. And this can be definitely vegan. Definitely if you use a plant-based milk. The chocolate chips, there's dairy-free, plant-based chocolate chips. I use those in my own house. And then the almond butter, like a nut butter. So definitely vegan if you want. So I can close out my education. So Tina can bring out the, you want me to do the last slide or you want Isabel to show her recipe? I'm good with whatever.
Why don't you talk through while I get Isabel back on
Okay.
the camera for the sake
Okay.
of time here?
Yep. So just some very last minute tips here. So managing diabetes really is eating well and nutritious most of the time, but also not over restricting, right? Allowing those sweet treats once in a while. And when you're considering a recipe that is your favorite, a brownie or a cupcake or whatever you have, keep in mind both your diabetes and your heart. So you want to look at that total fat, right? Keep that minimal, maybe 5 grams a serving or less, low in saturated fat, keep that less than a gram, really minimal added sugars, protein, if you can have protein and find grams of protein in that recipe analysis, that's a bonus, and so is the fiber. Really, you're getting more bang for your buck that way.
All right. So I just want to apologize for rushing that last little bit, but I looked at the time and I saw, oh no, we only had like 3 minutes left. So I just wanted to make sure that I had time to show you guys what the recipe ends up looking like. So here is our chickpea cookie dough. So because it's almond joy ish, we added some coconut and some almonds. You could toast the coconut, toast the almonds. It's delicious, just scooped out on like a graham cracker or a piece of fruit. It's so good, so delicious. So that's what that looks like. And then the bar, since it just came out of the oven, it's not going to be holding very well. So in the recipe, it's actually suggested to, when it is done cooking, to let it cool for a little while to kind of set, and then you're gonna chill it in the refrigerator for about 4 hours. After you chill it in the refrigerator for about 4 hours, it's going to definitely be more of a bar. Because we are limited on time today, I just took it right out of the oven as is, and so it is gonna be eaten like a little crisp right now. But nonetheless, these are the beautiful colors that you're gonna see when you make that bar. Like I said, it's gonna be definitely more of a bar. It's going to be kept together when you let it chill. But look how beautiful those raspberries and the oatmeal crumble look to make it just absolutely beautiful and delicious.
Looks wonderful. Love it.
Yes, looks scrumptious. All right.
Getting
Well,
closer to my screen.
yeah, I know. Well, thank you, Isabel, for showcasing those beautiful recipes and how we can use chickpeas in dessert for a blood sugar friendly dessert, as well as those berries. We thank you all so much for participating in our February Diabetes Cooking Club. Just a reminder, we will not have a Diabetes Cooking Club in March, but please check out our April Diabetes Cooking Club. Register for that. We're going to be focusing on pasta in April. You're not going to want to miss that one. And of course, we have the rest of 2025 schedule released as well. So sign up for as many of them as that you want to attend. We appreciate you all so much for participating and coming to our Diabetes Cooking Club, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.